It's nice to see you out here, neighbors. I see you like to come out on an April evening, just as I do. I like to come out and look around and see how the town has changed. I remember back to a night like this in the spring many, many years ago. That night was April 19th, 1775. Of course, the town's changed a lot since then. This road here that we're on, that was just a dirt path back then. And the meeting house here behind me, that was up on the hill up there. Behind me was the horse shed back then. Of course, all these buildings around here, they weren't here back then either. Just the graveyard up there and the common where the Minutemen used to drill. I was a Minuteman back then, so was my younger brother Daniel. And our father's house, you can't really see it from here. It's just up over the ridge there, Joshua Childs. That's where Daniel, grew up. Oh yeah. Town has changed a good deal. Lincoln was a quiet place back then. But there was grand drama in April of 1775, right here. Grand drama indeed. Let me tell you about it. It was a time of great anger in Massachusetts. Great anger indeed. About, 2 years before, 2 years. The government in London had angered us all by imposing a tax on tea. It was a small tax. We could have paid it. Parliament had no right to tax us. Well, people of Boston, they just took one of those shipments of tea and they threw it all into the harbor and destroyed it all. And the government of London found out about that. It resolved to punish the entire city, the entire colony. So they closed the harbor of Boston to all trade, and that threw thousands of people out of there, thousands, and they flooded out here into the countryside. And then they sent the British general to be the governor of all of Massachusetts, and to make certain that we obeyed, they sent 3,000 redcoat soldiers to Boston. Massachusetts, under military rule. What an outrage. We governed ourselves for 150 years. Oh yes, it was a time of great anger here in Massachusetts. And the whole colony was a dry keg of gunpowder. And the only question was when the spark would come, they could all explode. Of course, you and I know that spark was struck on the night of April 18th when the soldiers in Boston crossed the Charles River and headed toward Concord to seize the guns and the gunpowder the patriotic Americans had stored there in order to protect American liberties. You and I know that now, but imagine what it was like to be a citizen in Lincoln back then. We didn't yet know the story. We didn't know how it would end. So I come out on nights like this, and I let my memories carry me back to that time. Oh, it was about 2 o'clock in the morning, as I remember, and the weather was cool and mild, and the sky was clear, and the moon was just past full, and it was high in the horizon, and it spread the moonlight all over the countryside. Of course, the fields were cleared back then for farm and for pasture, and so you could see your neighbors' houses well in the distance. But it was 2 o'clock in the morning, and Lincoln was a farming community, and folks had to get up early at sunrise, so the houses were dark. It was quiet. All of Lincoln was asleep. But on the North Road, on the road to the north of Lincoln, it goes from Lexington to Concord. There in the shadows of the moonlight, there was a patrol of British officers that had set a trap. They knew that as soon as the soldiers marched out of Boston, the alarm would be spread to the countryside by patriotic Americans on horseback, and so they would come out to Lincoln earlier that evening and had set a trap on the North Road, right here in Lincoln, in order to catch those riders. And sure enough, not too long after that, along came 3 of them. Paul Revere was one, you know Paul Revere. Concord. He'd been courting his sweetheart in Lexington that night, or at least that was the story he told. And he was headed back home again, and he joined up with Dawes and with Revere. Samuel Prescott, that was his name. So they were hurrying along the road there in North Lincoln, stopping from time to time to spread the alarm to the houses as they went, and sure enough, with it past 2 o'clock, they ran straight into the British patrol. Well, Paul Revere, he was captured right away. That ended his ride that night. And William Dawes, he wheeled his horse around and he galloped back in toward Lexington. And he was fast enough. The British soldiers couldn't catch up with him, and he got away. But now who would carry the alarm to Concord? Well, it was that young Samuel Prescott. He knew the road very well, and he spurred his horse into the field, and he leaped over a stone wall, and he got onto a path that goes down into the swamp there, and the British soldiers tried to follow him, but they really couldn't. And about a mile further on, he came back to the road near the house of Mary and Samuel Hartwell, and he told them the alarming news. Well, Samuel Hartwell, he was my sergeant in the Lincoln Minutemen, and he knew what he had to do. He grabbed his musket, and he got his cartridge box, and wrapped himself some food and got ready to march. And according to the story they tell, it was Mary Hartwell did a very brave thing then. She threw a shawl around her shoulders and she went back out into the moonlit road, and she walked back toward the British patrol. And she did that so that she could carry the alarm to her neighbor's house, which was about a quarter of a mile away. And it's a good thing she did, because her neighbor was William Smith. And William Smith was the captain of the Lincoln Minutemen. Well, and all that happened right here in Lincoln, 2 miles from where we are right now. Quite wrong indeed. Well, picture in your mind what Captain Smith did then. He saddled his horse and he got ready to ride. He bid farewell to his wife and to his children. He couldn't know when he'd see them again. Couldn't know if he'd see them again. And then he spurred his horse, and he rode here to the center of Lincoln to spread the alarm and to rouse the Lincoln Minutemen. I was a Minuteman back then, so was my young brother Daniel. And on an evening like this, my imagination can carry me back to that time, picture it all in my mind. Sound of the hoofbeats of Captain Smith's horse, and Captain Smith coming in and bringing the alarm, and the clanging of the bells, and off in the distance musket fire to spread the alarm to the countryside, and the fifes and the drums, and the Minutemen running from the houses and answering to the alarm, and all of Lincoln was up and to arms. Oh yes, neighbors, imagine yourself here on that evening, watching, waiting, fearful as we were. The most important day in American history.